Well, I don't know. Is a self-transforming elf machine a deva?
What do you mean?
This is a phrase that has been associated with me for many, many years. I encounter self-transforming elf machines, which are creatures, entities, perhaps, although they're not made out of matter. They're made out of, as nearly as I can figure it out, they're made out of syntax driving light. But if what your question addresses is the issue of entities on the other side, there are definitely entities on the other side for me, and there seem to be such for many, many other people. I'm not by any standard sensitive, so if I get entities, then they are substantial and capable of defending themselves. It's one of the most challenging parts of the whole psychedelic landscape, because most people can accept the idea of disordered sensory input, recovery of traumatic memory material, so forth and so on. But what are we to do with an elf? That becomes a little harder to contextualize in psychoanalytic theory, although Jung did a good job when he said autonomous elements can escape from the psyche's control and present themselves as independent entities. I'm not sure he's ever seen a self-transforming elf machine. Are those Davic entities, do you think?
Yeah, I don't have any hallucinogenic experience. Myself, I'm more familiar with connections in nature and other experiences that people have had with the Pinhorn group or being in the Himalayas, that kind of thing. So what you're saying is through your experiences with pharmaceuticals, you have that experience, even if you're not having it when you're not.
Oh, it's the defining characteristic of the true DMT flash. I mean, it is not subtle. These things mob you like badly trained Rottweilers. They come bounding forward by the dozens, by the hundreds. They jump into your body. They jump out of your body. And I've thought, it maps to some degree over the archetype of the little people, the leprechaun, the fae, and being Irish and being Jungian. I'm willing to entertain, maybe I have a special relationship to this stuff. But then in the Amazon, the people using DMT that I studied in the early 70s, the reason they did it, they said, was to speak with the little people. What puzzles me about my contacts with these beings is it conforms to, let's say, the Irish model. They are small, they live under hills, or when you're with them you have a sense that you are somehow underground. They are full of merriment, almost to a manic and frightening level. It's sort of like a Bugs Bunny cartoon gone berserk. They are friendly, but play rough. In other words, it's a land of explosions and falling anvils. It's like a Roadrunner cartoon or something. But the overwhelming feeling is love, but I spell it L-U-V to distinguish it from the ordinary kind, because it's just this kind of crazy, childish affection. And they're delighted to have me in their presence. Well, now that all sort of corresponds with the Irish model or with worldwide folklore of little creatures, little people in the woods.
And that's specifically
Mm-hmm. What's happening that is not mappable onto fairyland or leprechauns or Findhornian beings or anything like that, or anything else I've ever heard of, is that these entities have an agenda. And It's a very curious agenda. They use a language which you see. It is made out of sound. In other words, it is sound, but you see it in that state. And the entire point of the encounter from their perspective seems to be to teach you to do this. They want you to transform your language. They want you to speak elfish. And, what? If you've never done DMT and you just smoked it and you're 30 seconds into this experience and this is what it's come down to, you wonder what to make of it. I've thought about this for years and years and years, and I don't know why there should be an invisible syntactical intelligence giving language lessons in hyperspace, but that certainly consistently seems to be what is happening. I've thought a lot about language as a result of that, and several things about it. First of all, it is the most remarkable thing we do, I think. And we talked a little bit this morning about epigenetic behaviors. Chomsky showed that language, the deep structure of language, is under genetic control. But that's like the assembly language level. Local expressions of language are epigenetic. And it seems to me that language is some kind of enterprise of human beings that is not finished. That we have now left the grunts and the digs of the elbow somewhat in the dust, but the most articulate, brilliantly pronounced and projected English or French or German or Chinese is still a poor carrier of our intent, a very limited bandwidth for the intense compression of data that we are trying to put across to each other. And it occurs to me from studying McLuhan and other people that the ratios of the senses, the ratio between the eye and the ear and so forth, this also is not genetically fixed. There are ear cultures and there are eye cultures, print cultures and electronic cultures. So it may be that our perfection and our completion lies in the perfection and completion of the word. Again, this curious theme of the word and its effort to concretize itself. A language that you can see is far less ambiguous than a language that you hear. If I read a paragraph of Proust, then we could spend the rest of the afternoon discussing what did he mean. But if we look at a piece of sculpture by Henry Moore, we can discuss what did he mean, but at a certain level there is a kind of shared bedrock that isn't in the Proust passage. We each stop at a different level with the textual passage. With the three-dimensional object, we all sort of start from the same place and then work out our interpretations. Is it a nude? Is it an animal? Is it bronze? Is it wood? Is it poignant? Is it comical? So forth and so on. So this is not a very scientific part of the rap, because it's very hard to convince people that there are non-human intelligences this side of Genebel Ganubi. And when you tell them that these non-human intelligences are accessed through the diminutive mushrooms growing on their front lawn, they just write you off as a squirrel. But this question of the non-human intelligences is very, very much on the agenda. All shamans in all times and places have claimed this. And the thing that so pleases me about DMT is, a lot of people will not take a psychedelic like LSD or psilocybin or something, because it lasts hours and hours. Inevitably, a thing lasting that long, you're going to end up dealing with your stuff, your anxiety, your fear, your this and that. And a lot of people don't care for that sort of thing. Whether that's good or bad is another issue. With DMT, it lasts 4 minutes. And so how lost in an examination of childhood trauma can you get in 4 minutes, especially when you have hundreds of elves tugging at your coat sleeves? So it's really an incredibly powerful tool. You know, we have the UFO people claiming there are non-human intelligences, but they have no a reliable method of contact that works for a skeptic. The great thing about DMT is it doesn't require belief, a quality I mentioned last night as belonging to the truth. The truth requires no belief. It is the truth. I'm sure there are probably people listening to my words at this moment who have encountered these entities. This, to my mind, is the great and chilling mystery in the center of the psychedelics. And once you've encountered these things, you have to take them seriously, to the point of you have to understand, where do they fit into the great order of being? What are these things? How can there be a life form not made of matter? In other words, how can they be intelligent and coherent but have no fixed body outline? Is the universe in fact populated by non-human, non-material intelligences that we somehow contact using drugs? I mean, that's one possibility.
Beyond the DMT experience.
That's the question, yes. Where are they when you're not there? Is it an ongoing thing? Is something going on this planet? Are these the controllers? Are you getting into a back channel that weren't cleared for? Or, and this is to my mind the most chilling and appalling and exhilarating possibility of all, when you go back over the shamanism thing, you say, you shamans, now where is this all coming from? They will tell you it comes from ancestors. Well, that's a cheerful and fairly sanitized concept, but when you deconstruct it, ancestors are dead people. What is actually being suggested there is that there is a kind of ecology of souls, one energy threshold over, that is co-present with this world. Well, strangely enough, that's what the Irish myth of the Fae says. It says these are dead people. These are souls that linger in our environment, and this is what souls look like. Again, folklore is only a guide, but if what we are dabbling with, if what lies at the end of the road of shamanism is the dissolution of the boundary between life and death itself, then the million-year intuition that this was a path worth following will be dramatically vindicated. And one of the reasons I've preached DMT so furiously is I just want a larger body of people to take it so that we can compare data. We need to understand, how is this possible? It raises a whole host of questions. One is, not only how is this possible, but then given that it is possible, how has it been kept secret? How can millions of people go to the grave, raise children, hold jobs, so forth and so on, go to the grave, and the news of a doorway standing that agape hasn't penetrated? I mean, most people believe they're imprisoned in this world, and that the only hope is maybe 15 years at the ashram and hideous acts of self-abnegation and control and so forth and so on. And actually, the boundary between us and an unspeakably bizarre world, it's 30 seconds away at any time, as long as you have DMT available to smoke. That's appalling to me. I mean, it means we don't know nothing. Yeah.
You talked about trying to map your experiences onto the myths. I wonder if it's possible that you could look at the myths for information of mastery. That is, we've no longer masters of this doorway. We're trying to rediscover a mastery that's been held for thousands of years. Maybe there's something that we can find in the myths that tell us a behavior or a mode of being in that state that would be useful. For instance, catching the leprechaun and getting the pot of gold implies there's some kind of game we can play with them that yields some value.
Yeah, well, the classical myth about leprechauns is that they want to keep you. If they catch you, or if you mess with them, they'll hold you. And then you have to bargain your way out. And the bargain is always the solution of a riddle. Notice that what's happening here is it's all about linguistic prowess. It's all about poetic skill. It's all about language ability. Only the eloquent, only the clever, only those who are masters of riddlery and pun are acceptable to these entities. Apparently that's what they value. Why? I guess because they're made of language. So, and they themselves have, when I try to describe to people what they are or what they look like, various things can be said. They're like self-dribbling jeweled basketballs. In other words, they don't have faces or anything, not the little yellow leather jerkins and the curve-pointed shoes, not that. Self-dribbling jeweled basketballs, and they use the language to make objects. That's what this language, how this language is different from ordinary English. English, we can make meaning. The DMT language makes objects. It's like a higher dimensional language. And so these things bound forward with the complete purpose of delighting you. And they reach into the air, into their bodies, into some nearby invisible dimension, and they pull out what I would call words, puns, objects, hallucinations, things which manage to be all those things simultaneously. And they say, look at this. And it's purely designed to dazzle and astound. And then a colleague will elbow the little guy aside and say, no, look at this. And they're all in front of you, chirping, clamoring. And these objects that they make begin themselves to speak and float away and reproduce. And you've arrived. 30 seconds ago, you were sitting in a room with your grubby friend somewhere pursuing spiritual understanding. Now this is going on. And it's very hard to not be horrified. I mean, the cognitive dissonance, the neck-snapping switch of dimensions, and then after about 3, 4, 5 minutes, it retracts. It loses its vitality, and it begins to pull away from you, almost like a boat pulling away from a dock. And in fact, I had one trip where, metaphorically, not having hands, they all turned and waved and said, "Deja vu, deja vu," which is, of course, absurd. Now, people can say all kinds of things. They can say, well, this is just the autonomous substructures of the psyche manifesting themselves. But it sounds to me like a lawyer's explanation. Yeah.
In light of that, allow me to extend the skeptical line just a bit further. Of your description of the event, is it common to everyone who has participated, to your knowledge? Does it represent 10%, 50%, 75%? Are they equal in description? Do they vary? Is this unique to your description?
All good questions. It's hard to smoke DMT, especially if you're not a smoker. It's harsh. Some people don't get enough. I would say of the people who smoke as much as I think you should smoke, 75% probably report something like this. It's hard for people to report. I mean, I've had years and years of practice. What I've just told you about this is an incredibly crumpled, compressed, edited version. Because what is really happening in there is unspeakably bizarre. Unspeakably bizarre. That seems in fact to be its quality, that it is unspeakable. And that therefore in order to speak of it, you have to make a leap of faith to this higher order glossolalia-like language. Ayahuasca is a slow release DMT if you deconstruct it pharmacologically, so that instead of it happening, DMT, instead of it happening in 4 minutes, it happens over 4 hours. Again, at very high dose ayahuasca and at very high dose psilocybin, these entities begin to emerge. When I take psilocybin, sometime in the second hour, I pass through a place which I've learned to recognize. It's a feeling, and I call it elf country. And there are no elves, but there's a feeling. And then I call them, and following the directions of a favorite episode of I Love Lucy, I call them by saying, "Come in, little green men, come in, little green men." It's simply a permitting. It's simply an invocation. And then they approach like a Newari band from a distance. You can hear the brass and the drum, and as they get closer, and it begins as a sound. It's very interesting. It begins as a sound, and as it gets louder, there comes a point where imperceptibly it becomes visible. And then all I can say is it gets bigger, just like someone marching toward you through three-dimensional space. And so it goes from being a little phenomenon on the horizon of your awareness to you're there, you're with them, you're playing the tuba, you're marching along, it's happening. And then they sort of peel off and march away and leave you in the same way they came. The archetype of this phenomenon, as far as I can tell, is the archetype of the circus. DMT is somehow the cosmic circus. And if you analyze what the circus is, it's a closed environment of permitted outrageousness that roves the straight landscape, setting up in one town and then another and then another. And it's a thing of wonder and light. And carny people are loose. They're not like you and me. I remember in the little town I grew up in, every 4th of July, the carnival would come to town for Cherry Day. And we kids were told we couldn't stay out after 9 o'clock when the carnival was in town, because there was just this aura, more liquor was being consumed, more people were staying up late, so forth and so on. And if you analyze the circus, it has all the elements of the DMT thing. I mean, there's the center ring, the clowns. And Henry Munn, in a wonderful essay on psilocybin mushrooms called The Mushrooms of Language, describes them as self-performing acrobatic bits of grammar, is how he describes them. This is clearly the same thing. The circus is a wonderful place for children, but it has behind that a dark side. I think my own earliest reminiscence of what I could call erotic awareness, I must have been very, very young, under 3, because I was being held by people. And I was taken to a circus, and there was a woman there in a tiny G-string costume, spinning, hanging by her teeth up near the center, and it was all there. Death and eros and risk and drama. And, I got it.